In 1776, a divided people pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to the promise of America. As we approach the 250th anniversary, that promise is being tested. It's time to renew that pledge. From June 25th to 28th, 2026, Braver Angels invites you to our national convention in Philadelphia. We will gather conservatives, liberals, and independents to bridge our divides and practice courageous citizenship. Visit braverangels.org to learn more about on-campus dorm lodging accommodations for this event, where we will gather conservatives, liberals, and independents to bridge our divides and practice courageous citizenship. Join us at Temple University for 3 days of inspiring debates, workshops, and action. Together, we'll develop a renewed pledge for our time, rediscovering the trust essential for liberty. Be part of the solution. Register for the Braver Angels 2026 National Convention at braverangels.org.
Ben Franklin walked out of the Constitutional Convention and someone asked him what they'd been given. He said, "A republic if you can keep it." My guest today wrote a book about what happens when you can't, and probably more importantly, what they believe it actually takes to get it back. Stick with me. Welcome back, my friends, to the D-Rate the Hate podcast. I'm your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. The D-Rate the Hate podcast is proudly produced in collaboration with Braver Angels, America's largest grassroots, cross-partisan organization working towards civic renewal. This podcast amplifies the mission that we share to foster a more respectful and united America where civic friendship thrives even when we disagree. Each week, through the power of story, conversation, and connection with incredible guests, we work to build bridges instead of barriers. Not to change minds on the issues, but to change how we see one another when we differ. Because, friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, share it with a friend, and visit braverangels.org to learn how you can get involved in the movement to bridge the partisan divide. Friends, I am so incredibly grateful that you have joined me for another powerful D-Rate the Hate episode. So let's get to it. Kevin Dolan and Peter Calfee didn't set out to write a book together. They met at a Veterans Day luncheon in 2022, strangers sitting next to each other, and over the next 3 years of conversation and a lot of give and take, they produced Hijacked, Our Republic Unless You Can Save It. Between them, they bring military service, careers in financial services, and decades of watching something go sideways in the fabric of our American civic life. Their thesis is straightforward. The foundational pillars of a strong republic, critical thinking, education, faith and values, history, political systems, and economic systems, have been quietly undermined. Not all at once, not always intentionally, but the cumulative effect is a country that increasingly treats symptoms instead of causes and mistakes noise for conversation. Their model is Thomas Paine's Common Sense, 47 pages that reached a quarter of the colonial population and changed everything. They're not claiming to match that, but they are asking the same question. What does it actually take to preserve what was built? Let's get into it with Peter Calfee and Kevin Dolan. Here we go. Kevin Dolan and Peter Calfee, welcome to the D-Rate the Hate podcast, guys. How are you today?
Terrific. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's fantastic to have you here. I'm excited to hear about this book. The book, it's called Hijacked, Our Republic Unless We Can Save It. And the book, when I was presented with this idea to have you guys on, I'm looking at this and I'm like, I immediately, obviously, my mind goes to the old the old Ben Franklin phrase when they come out of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and the lady walks up and says, "Mr. Franklin, sir, what have you given us?" And he says, "A republican, if you can keep it." Right.
So we played on that very thing.
Yep, I had imagined, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it. But before we get deep into the book, guys, I want to hear a little bit about you guys and what brought you to this, and as I understand it, looking into your backgrounds a little bit, you guys are. I think you both had some military experience, ended up in financial services in certain ways, done a number of different things over the course of your careers. But what gets you guys, Kevin and Peter, together at this point and say, you know what, we need to write a book? I always like to get a little bit of a backstory. I like to have a little bit of the why. So, Kevin, let's start with you.
Certainly. What happened was in November, on Veterans Day of 2022, I went to a Veterans Day luncheon. A friend of mine asked me to go to our club and said they had this luncheon. I said, great. So we went. Peter Calfee sits down next to me, who I don't know at this point in time. And but I recognized immediately that I'm sitting next to a very bright person. And I've always understood that if you're going to do a project, it's always best to find someone more intelligent than you. So I found someone more intelligent than I, and then Peter took a look at a few pieces of information that I provided him, and we decided to write the book together. And we weren't committed to successfully writing; we were committing to engaging and starting. We did that, and 3 years later, not a single argument, a lot of give and take, a lot of debate about what we each thought, but never an argument. And it was really a great experience, and we think that the book achieves what we hoped it would.
In fairness, Kevin brought stacks of notes that he'd been making for the years prior to this meeting.
Yeah.
And it all had to do with dots not yet connected as to what's going on in our country, what's going on in conversation, what's going on actually, well, in your industry and what you do, polarization or depolarization, or as you say, rate the hate. And we knew something was wrong because how many times have we experienced talking to someone who promptly gets up, I can't even talk to you, I'm leaving, and off they go.
That's right.
And and that's not productive. That's not collegial or sororal, fraternal. That's not getting together and working towards a conclusion together. So we began to connect these dots using as a model Common Sense by Thomas Paine, who was, when he wrote the 4 little pamphlets put together in 47 pages, he wrote them anonymously.
Right.
With a little over 2 million people in the 13 colonies, and about 500,000 were printed. So it's absolutely, it was a seminal work that charged everybody up for 1775 as to why we should bust apart from the empire of Great Britain, and giving it logic and thought and providing that critical thought as to where we want to go as a country, not part of a colony.
Yeah.
There's an early version of a viral experience, 500,000 copies on 2 million population.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you crank out a full quarter of the population in distributable copies of something right off the bat, and yeah, you're gonna make a splash, right? I mean, that's gonna do some stuff, and I mean, I'm very thankful that it happened. Started what I believe to be the greatest country that's ever been devised by mankind, and we can go to the works of all kinds of different people and the different things that the founders leaned upon, and in terms of their understanding of what a republic should be, and what the pursuit of happiness meant, and we could think about Cicero and Socrates and all these different people that really steered the minds of our founders, and why we came to have a republic instead of a democracy. That's where I want to start our conversation, guys, is that whole conversation right now. Those are two very politically charged words right now that a lot of people don't completely understand, or to your point, Peter, when you say a lot of times people will try to sit down and have a conversation, but something happens right away and says, I can't talk to this person. Well, that republic versus a democracy thing, I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation where people just lose it. One side or the other just loses it over those two words and kind of what those words mean. So what do you make of that, and how does that trigger word or those trigger words affect people's ability for critical thinking?
Well, today, I think you would kind of go back to the concept of education. We can be educated where we teach people how to think, or we can educate where we teach people what to think. One is indoctrination, teaching people what to think. Teaching how to think means you're independent. You're going to form your own opinion. You have a right to an opinion. But in today's educational environment, there's too often a process of somewhat of indoctrination. But the safe space concept, I really almost cannot comprehend, because when we went to college, you were supposed to be in an intellectually stimulating environment where you are challenging everybody and everybody's challenging you, and you're developing your thought process, and you're developing your intellect. And the test is, how well can I harbor my information to present it in the most effective fashion, to make the points, and to engage in a very productive debate. And by productive, I'm not saying that a person has to come away agreeing with me. In fact, I'll give you an example. I can take a position in an argument, and I can say, here are the contributing factors, and I therefore, with these factors, I come to this conclusion. Now, I weigh those factors in a certain fashion. That's me. If you take the same factors, agree to all the same factors, but weigh them differently, you can come to a different conclusion.
That's right.
And what people don't realize is, it's not about saying, oh, we're talking, and I've got to talk back to you. They're not being interested in the other person. They're saying, I'm willing to have a conversation if you want to listen to me. But if I've got to remove myself from the conversation, what they're really saying is they've got no interest in the other person.
Right. All right.
And that's a shame, because we've all got something to contribute.
Along your lines, Wilk, the democracy republic, think back to the 13 colonies, and there were significant and major differences between each colony and the population of each colony.
That's right.
And we begin to immediately walk right into the room called republic, because democracy could have been the most populous states. Democracy could have been applied by 2 or 3 or 4 states being the majority of votes for all 13. That's not at all what they wanted. We had a classic example of the House of Lords, House of Commons in England, and that carried over. We have a lot to thank for Magna Carta and after that in Great Britain. But we wanted that representation in geographic and political and social structures. And that is exactly how it worked out. Kevin makes a beautiful argument about, look, it says, written by slave owners. But we didn't get rid of slavery till Civil War, and then it took another 100 years of application. But they knew where they wanted to go, and they created the structure and the fabric of our society that could get us to where we wanted to go with representation.
That's right.
Switzerland is a pure democracy, probably the most classic example. They just vote, and if the majority says this, that's what they do. They don't have House of Lords, House of Commons, Congress, Senate. They don't have any of that. They just have representation, and if something bugs them enough, they have a national plebiscite, and that's what gets passed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think and when I think about those things, and certainly the way that those two terms are used today, as opposed to how they were used back in 1776, 1789, whatever the case may be, it is a bit different now. And I think it's certainly a lot more, in my opinion, it's probably more politically charged, and because I think it's less understood today than it was then.
I think understanding it is critical. I think that difference on republic versus a democracy. You've got the potential for a tyranny of the majority in a democracy, because just everything is just pure majority. And what Peter alluded to in terms of some populous states in 13 colonies could overwhelm the votes because they had a bigger population. Well, the nature of a republic is to make sure that every entity and every individual is represented. Well, that means the state is represented. That means the individual is represented. Therefore, the structure of congressmen by population and senators by state. Okay, you add those up, that's the electoral college. So the point of the electoral college is to say we don't want flyover states. We don't want elections that say we care about California and New York and Massachusetts, and when we get enough critical mass of population, we get to control something because we got the sheer majority.
Yeah, we just forget about everything in between, and it turns into
everybody involved, and that's what the republic achieves.
Yeah, and really, we're more than somewhat optimistic, because if you just study our history, you can go back to many periods of time in the last 250 years where we had Douglas MacArthur take horses and kill people on the mall who were not rioting, perhaps, but certainly protesting against the lack of their bonus payments in World War One. But that didn't stop him from shooting a lot of people. Right. We've had violence on Wall Street. In 1919, bombs blew off. The fragments are still in the original J.P. Morgan Bank building. So we've been here before. We're just adapting our structures to get us to the next phase of our progress.
So let's talk about that, because I think the optimism is very important, and I want to make sure that the conversation stays optimistic, and I want to hear more about what people are going to find in this book. And the thing, when you said, Peter, when Kevin brought all these notes, it was a bunch of dots, basically dots that you guys had to then weave together into something. When you're talking about those dots, are you talking about the pillars that you guys talk about in the book in terms of the 6 pillars? And let's talk about those 6 pillars. I know we've talked about, really 2 of them so far in terms of critical thinking and education. But in terms of these pillars, what it is that those pillars are, and how those particular pillars have been hijacked.
Well, and we can also use the metaphor of a tapestry where the threads are all woven together to support the entire picture that suddenly presents itself as you step away from the tapestry and now see it. These could be 6 foundational pillars that keep the structure solid. We talk about education. We talk about teaching to the test. We talk about rote memorization. We talk about lack of mastery of skills and the fact that everybody must learn this in 2 weeks. Well, no, I might take 10 weeks to learn it, and you might take 10 hours to learn it. But that's right. You master the skill and you move on at the proper rate and move ahead, as opposed to being forced to matriculate, forced to graduate, and not really know anything. That's education. The lack of critical thinking is really a byproduct of the screens we look at every day, and we don't. A lot of us don't have the time to critically think about what we're looking at. So we just accept it, or what we hear, or what's on the newscasts and so forth. And it's amazing how many people don't read anymore. They simply listen.
So what I would say is that critical thinking is the process of questioning everything. That's the first chapter. The second chapter is education. We've covered that pretty as you described. Third chapter is religion, faith, and values. Well, what's important in that? It's not that we're saying that everybody's got to follow a particular religion. We think most religions have some fundamental excellent qualities about treating their fellow man well, and we could all live by the golden rule if we took it to heart properly. But it creates a value system. How do you acquire a value system? Well, with your family's exposure to what their religion is, but the positive application of religion, not the theocratic, controlling, I'm going to tell you what to do, and in fact, violent application of religion. So when you get your value system, it's critical for the fabric of society, because the value system says I agree with where I'm at, etc.
And that's the positive side. Well, that's really wake up. You have something that guiding you that day, whatever that may be, wherever you are in the world. There's some string of continuity from Socrates and Plato and Aristotle to the present day. And we have hundreds of quotes in the book, as you've seen, that that backstop and support that. And if you don't have that, if you wake up and you're really in a meaningless, less existence, you're like Nietzsche in a corner with nothing to live for. And if that is the case, it would be our argument that is exactly how identity politics was developed in the last 20 years, because you created your own identity because you didn't have any. You didn't have a face system. And you created that identity, and then you present it. And Wilk, you better listen, and you better pay attention to my identity. And if you don't, I'm getting up and leaving because I can't talk to you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
In 1776, a divided people pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to the promise of America. As we approach the 250th anniversary, that promise is being tested. It's time to renew that pledge. From June 25th to 28th, 2026, Braver Angels invites you to our national convention in Philadelphia. We will gather conservatives, liberals, and independents to bridge our divides and practice courageous citizenship. Visit braverangels.org to learn more about on-campus dorm lodging accommodations for this event, where we will gather conservatives, liberals, and independents to bridge our divides and practice courageous citizenship. Join us at Temple University for 3 days of inspiring debates, workshops, and action. Together, we'll develop a renewed pledge for our time, rediscovering the trust essential for liberty. Be part of the solution. Register for the Braver Angels 2026 National Convention at braverangels.org.
This is something that I talk so much about in terms of whether it be identity politics in general or people's personal identity, what their core identity is, and when people then take, going back to one of the first things you said in this conversation, Peter, is, sometimes people will sit down and try to have a conversation with somebody, but they realize quickly that this person isn't, doesn't think like they do or believe the same things that they do, so they're like, I'm just out of here. Well, I think a lot of that stems from the idea that people have allowed their political identity to become part of their core identity, or even a big part, like a large portion of their core identity. Tribal. So each time somebody says something that doesn't comport with your political identity, they take it as a personal attack, right? And then the conversation's over because they take it as being attacked.
Support the tribe. Because I'm a tribal individual, I'm a part of a tribe. You either are supporting the tribe or you're not. And so I only am going to work with a function of supporting a tribe. Well, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
That's indoctrination.
Yeah. In a republic, we're supposed to be thinking critically. We become educated to learn how to think. We do that well. We apply a value system. And then we also want to look back in history and say, what have we learned so we don't have to repeat all these mistakes? And also identify what great things have been done. So we say that's a great example, as opposed to something I want to avoid. When you've got that fundamental set of pillars in place, you now are ready to apply them to political systems and economic systems. And Churchill was asked, what do you think of the democratic system? And he says, it's the worst system except for all the rest. That's a great, and that phrase applies to economics too. If you look at communism, socialism, theocratic places, etc., the process, how does it work for an economic system? Well, that capitalism is the worst except for all the rest, because you take political systems that control, centrally plan, dictate things. Well, if you go and understand price point discovery, Adam Smith and the Invisible Hand, etc., price point discovery is this huge marketplace around the world and within entities of countries and states and cities and all that stuff, where people make decisions every day, multiple decisions. So you've got billions and billions of people, and they're all making multiple decisions a day. Pretty soon you got trillions of decisions being made. Well, do you think someone can centrally plan decision making? No.
Communism has never worked. Unfortunately, it kills hundreds of millions of people simply because it takes a long while for it to figure out it doesn't work. Witness what's happening around the world now, what's happening in Cuba, what's happening in Venezuela, all of those things which prove yet again that socialism and communism don't work. The problem is, now ponder this one. You have two young men who never worked or earned a paycheck in their short lives get together and write a manifesto about how communism would be the most perfect structure in which to live. Mm-hmm. Not Engels and Marx. What a disaster. But they did it. They convinced half the world that this is the best way to go.
Right? Yeah, well...
And they hadn't had a job in their lives. You know, they wrote this thing about a theoretical concept, and that's great. But it gets back into understanding if something's going to work. If there's a few phrases that are useful. You want to harness the power of pursuit of self-interest. So in the Declaration of Independence was an aspirational document, as we kind of alluded to. All men are created equal. Well, as Peter said, they weren't equal for the next 100 years because it was then until the Civil War where slavery was eliminated, per se. But then, even then, it took from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to really make things better. And then we have elected a black president, and that is a wonderful thing. But we need to look at the entire continuum and say, what contributes to strengthening the fabric of society? Fabric of society is a very useful phrase. And it's dynamic. It's either strengthening or weakening. It's not remaining static. And so what are we doing to strengthen it? Well, we ought to pull on value system to strengthen it, because if we can create a common set of values where we say, you know, we shouldn't be murdering anybody, we shouldn't be stealing from anybody, we shouldn't be committing any fraud, which is theft, and other things of that nature, then society say, if we do this successfully, we're not abusing fellow citizens.
Right.
But you know, we don't write laws. We don't travel over to Paris and say, I want to vote in a French elections. So why is it anybody else could come into the United States and participate in that? They're welcome to come here as a visitor, and they're welcome to come here, and even if they can get a H-1B visa or a green card or whatever, they can participate and work towards citizenship. But citizenship has privileges, and the privileges should be given on a greater level to those that possess citizenship. And then other people working towards it have some privileges, not quite all of them. So they work towards citizenship, and they therefore get the remaining.
And that's why, well, we constantly say, it's a mantra in the book. Everybody can do the following. They can think and really put your mind, use it, think about what is the issue in front of you, question it constantly, as Kevin says, question the hypothesis of what's in front of you. Having thought it through to the point where this could make sense, I'm going to question and do my litmus test on whether it makes sense or not. And then you speak and continue to open your mouth and speak about what you thought about and what you question, so that you've done the verification, the authentication, and the application of what is in front of you as a situation to be embraced or solved.
And there's you referred to litmus tests. There's only a few, but they're very important to test whether or not an idea has any merit whatsoever. Number one, is it consistent? You can't have inconsistency and say we're strengthening fabric of society. I mean, you can't treat one person one way, treat another person differently, one favorably, one not favorably on the same situation, and say, you know, that's the way it is, and think the fabric of society is going to improve. It can't. The only thing that's going to enhance fabric of society is if we're consistent with how we treat people. Well, if we're consistent with how we treat people, another question to ask is a solution to a problem we've identified, distinguishing between symptoms and problems. You don't want to solve a symptom and be playing whack-a-mole forever. But if you identify the real problem, then is the solution I come up with, does it create a consistency, and is it sustainable in the long term? If it's not sustainable in the long term, if we can't afford it more than 2 years, then it's not sustainable for 20. You can only afford it for 2. Yeah. So how well have we done it? How much supervision does it take? Do we have to have policemen looking over everything? No, that's when you harness the power of pursuit of self-interest. If you put a good policy in place, it self-motivates people to behave properly. And within society, people are functioning as contributing members of society. Right. And so it doesn't take a lot of supervision and oversight.
Which speaks to the point we also raise in the book. as to the social contract, which was a concept that Rousseau developed in France as an author, as a philosopher, and that social contract between the individual, and I'm not talking Darwinism here, I'm talking about the individual as a member of society who willingly accepts the rules that society adopts to provide that fabric of society. And yet the government or the structure of society owes the individual the right to be free and unto him or herself. Pursuit of happiness. So there is this contract that goes back and forth that we always have to respect. And it can get biased and go one way, but go ahead.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Richard Davies, host of the podcast, How Do We Fix It?, where we report on the people, projects, and ideas of braver angels. Listen and subscribe to our shows wherever you get your podcasts. So far, we've recorded more than 36 episodes, all about braver angels. Most are less than 30 minutes long. Again, our podcast is How Do We Fix It? And our website is howdowefixit.me.
Well, yeah, that social contract is a huge part of this, and there's a number of different things here that were said that I'd like to get into, and we're already getting close to the end of our time. I want to see if we can narrow down a couple of things that are really important here, and do just a little bit of a back and forth. But when we think, Kevin, you had mentioned the idea that, treating the symptom instead of, treating the cause. And one of the biggest problems, and this is where my mind goes when I see a book like Hijacked, or, when I hear people talking about the different breakdown in things that we're seeing in the country today. And I think it's very important, Peter, what you brought up earlier is, we've seen some pretty ugly times. We've seen some very, very ugly times in this country. But the optimist thing is important, and I always want to bring it back to that. And I always want to bring it back to solutions. Because what I don't often see from our government is, especially now, I mean, and I think it's been getting worse, but what I don't often see is people looking to solve root causes to big problems. They want to address the symptoms, and they want to play with things. And I think it really comes down to, quite often, and this is where my maybe libertarian / conservatism mind goes, because I'm very skeptical of government power and what they actually do as opposed to what they're supposed to do, is they often mess around with the symptoms instead of addressing the root cause of a problem. And I think that's a big problem. So when I think about books like Hijacked, my mind immediately goes to, okay, well, who's doing the hijacking, and what is the definition of hijacked? So in the quickest, way, without, finger pointing, but actually what is happening in terms of the system that we currently have? How has it been hijacked?
I think the best example is the deep state process. You've got bureaucrats who are supposed to be carrying out the Constitution and the laws, regulations, when in fact they in many cases too often feel themselves as being superior. And so I'm the bureaucrat, I know this area, everybody else ignore anything else, I'm going to tell you what needs to be done. Well, when they just turned out away the Chevron thing at the Supreme Court, they reduced the power of the bureaucracy, and that needed to be done, because the bureaucracy is what enables things. You've got educational bureaucracy hijacking education, where they're doing more indoctrination than teaching young children how to think. The children are seed corn to the future. So we need to teach them how to think. And with artificial intelligence coming along, we definitely need to teach them how to think so they can control artificial intelligence, where it's a dangerous environment. The hijacking of religion. Well, theocracy to me is an example of hijacking a religion. Iranian theocracy. Here you've got someone that says that they are going to employ the will of God as if they know what God wants. Well, we've got all kinds of religious literature, and they've got the Quran, we've got the Bible, the Jewish state has the Talmud, And so all of these things have concepts. Okay, well, let's establish two different things. One is judgment in the ultimate form. That's God. There's a universal God. I think everybody talked about their God, but most people are talking about one singular God. Now, in society, under a social contract, where we say we signed it, we're going to function within this contract, and we're going to not only function within the contract and responsibilities under the rules, laws, regulations of the Constitution, but that also has mechanisms for change. So if we're going to change, we don't have violence, we don't destroy federal property, we don't create arson and all that kind of stuff. If we take our responsibility, we say, what are the mechanisms for making change? And we'll go through those. They're longhand, they're difficult, but understand mankind is only here for a nanosecond. So we're evolving. And it's the evolutionary concept that I think is helpful here. So that if you go and you understand you're evolving, you don't expect immediate change. But you say, we're going to work towards a better place. Okay, how do you work towards a better place? I will use the mechanisms, present ideas, present information to say that this needs to be addressed and try and create critical mass so that it's agreed to. I mean, if the SAVE Act says we ought to have ID for elections, and 85% of the population says that they want that, and then Congress, both the congressmen and the senators, can't get a majority when 85%, that's a supermajority, super majority. Why is it so hard for the congressmen to do what their constituents want? It makes no sense. So if we're going to do things right, we've got to understand we're still in a social contract. We've got to function within a social contract. We've got to look at sustainability. We've got to look at the fabric of society and looking for sustainability and consistency. And when you bring these things together, now it's one big picture. And that's the purpose of the book, is to create a bigger picture of the contributing factors, those pillars, as well as some litmus tests. And even at the end, where we talk about leadership skills, the primary definitional terms that I would say would be credibility and inspiration. But the sub-definitional terms are critical. They're integrity, selfless behavior, dependability, consistency, determination, and perseverance, teamwork, collaborative skills, communication skills, charisma. And vision is not leadership. That's a separate skill. So you want someone that can take you into the future. So you want someone with leadership skills, with vision skills.
And you see the checks and balances of our system, which we are thankful for. But it seems like water sloshing in the bathtub. It's sloshing ever higher in the bathtub. Something is propelling it ever higher, perhaps over the lip of the bathtub. And that is a result of having education move to an area that we think is not appropriate, where God is dead. Time declared that in the 60s. God is dead. Okay. You begin to whittle away at this, and you study the histories of Stalin and Lenin. They wrote books about this as to how to take over a society. And we are seeing a lot of that happen across the world. So it's insidious, but without those pillars that we described and the symptoms resolved into solutions, you ever get closer and closer to the abyss. You cannot function. And that's where we got very concerned, because we saw our whole economy, our whole political system getting close to the abyss.
Well, the social contract that we have with each other is incredibly important. I think you guys have laid out some very strong pillars here in how people need to be thinking about these things. We need to be thinking in terms, and I don't care where you fall on the political spectrum, we need to be thinking about solutions to the root causes of these issues, which I think you guys have laid out, and it's important that we do it. There's a number of things going wrong, and Peter, I love the idea of what you're talking about here in terms of a wash tub with the water sloshing from side to side. There's There's because eventually it just gets so chaotic that all the water just gets completely tossed out, and we've got nothing left. I think, again, I'll go back to something I said at the beginning of this conversation is, this is the greatest country ever devised by man. I do believe for certain, I'm fairly certain that it involved a lot of divine providence. I think it's going to take divine providence to right the ship and get that water to calm a little bit, Peter. And I think people need to check out your book, Hijacked, Our Republic Unless We Can Save It. And appreciate your time, guys. This has been fantastic conversation. Kevin Dolan and Peter Calfee, thank you so much for joining me here on the D-Rate the Hate podcast.
Thank you, Will.
Our pleasure, Will. Good being with you.
Friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to get the D-Rate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. We really are better together, so please take a moment to visit braverangels.org and consider joining the movement towards civic renewal and bridging our political divides. This is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make every day the day that you want it to be. With that, my friends, I'm going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.